Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're not a warrior, you're not a senator, a general, or a scheming emperor poisoning relatives at dinner. You're a little girl, Roman, upper class, and unfortunately born with symmetrical limbs and a politically useful family tree. You don't know it yet, but you've already been selected. You won't be married, you won't be free, you won't even belong to yourself, because tonight you're going to be sacred. And in ancient Rome, that's just a polite way of saying owned by the gods and micromanaged by men in robes. Before they shave your head and drape you in white for a life sentence of enforced purity and ritualized surveillance, do me one small favour. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing who's tuning in from around the world. And if you'd like early access to more of these grim bedtime stories, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find the Patreon link in the description. But for now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You're 6 years old, or maybe 7. It's hard to keep track when you're still figuring out numbers higher than 10, but you're old enough to understand that your mother's eyes look wrong. Not angry, not proud, just wet and distant, like she's trying to memorize your face. Your father, on the other hand, is practically glowing. He's always been ambitious, but this time it's different. He's not just thinking of the family's future, he's thinking of Rome's. And apparently, you're part of it. The Pontifex Maximus, the High Priest of Rome, head of all things sacred and supremely smug, is holding selections. He needs a new Vestal virgin, the last one aged out or died or possibly just cracked in half, under the weight of a lifetime without touching another human being. No one asks too many questions. What matters is that the slot is open and girls from the best families are being considered. You didn't know you were in the running. You didn't sign up. But you tick all the boxes. 2 living parents, no siblings currently imprisoned or publicly scandalous. All limbs accounted for, and that quiet, docile look adults mistake for piety, but is really just you being too shy to speak unless asked. You're brought to the forum in a stiff little tunic and sandals that chafe. You walk past statues of gods with abs harder than the paving stones beneath your feet, wondering vaguely if they're the ones doing the choosing. They're not. A council of men in increasingly elaborate robes sits in judgment. They ask you nothing. They don't need to. Your father speaks for you, and the priests nod. You don't understand the words, but you understand the look on your mother's face when your name is called. That's the moment your life ends. Quietly, without fanfare, in the shadow of a marble column. They don't let you say a proper goodbye. There's no hugging or weeping. That would be improper. Instead, your mother kisses your forehead with trembling lips, and your father puts a reassuring hand on your shoulder like he's bestowing a great honour. The priest tells you calmly that you now belong to Vesta, goddess of the hearth. It's supposed to be comforting. It isn't. You're taken to the atrium Vestae, the house of the Vestals. It's in the heart of Rome, just a few steps from the temple of Vesta itself, and it looks like a palace from the outside. Inside, it's cold. Not cruel, just indifferent. Everything is carved from stone and lit by oil lamps that make the air smell slightly burned. You're shown your room, a small chamber with a simple bed and an alcove for your sandals. There are no toys, no trinkets, no familiar voices, just a veil you're told to wear and silence you're expected to keep. No one tells you what happens if you say no, probably because no one ever has. Or if they did, they didn't get to keep saying anything afterward. What they do tell you is this: you are no longer a daughter. You are no longer part of your family. You are now a servant of the gods, sworn to 30 years of purity, discipline, and devotion. You will be taught to tend the sacred flame, to perform rituals, to embody the ideal Roman woman, chaste, obedient, silent. You are to be a living symbol of the state's divine favour. The expectations are enormous. The consequences of failure are worse. You miss your mother most at night. The marble floor keeps the chill long after the lamps are extinguished. You try not to cry because the walls carry sound too well, and Vestals are supposed to be composed. You lie on your back and stare at the ceiling, wondering what it means to be sacred. You don't feel sacred. You feel very small and very alone. The other girls don't speak much. They're older, already deep into their training, already fluent in the language of ritual. One of them teaches you how to fold your veil properly without creasing the edges. Another shows you how to walk without letting your sandals slap the floor. They are not unkind, but they are not warm. Warmth implies softness, and softness breaks. You will not break. That is the entire point of this. You begin your education. You learn prayers in archaic Latin that even most priests no longer understand. You memorize the calendar of rituals and the list of omens that must be interpreted before every public ceremony. You're taught to draw water from the sacred spring without splashing, to clean altars without bending at the waist, and to keep your eyes lowered in public, but never so low that you appear unaware of your surroundings. There are rules within rules, etiquette within etiquette. You never truly master them. You just learn to make fewer mistakes. One day, you ask if you'll ever see your mother again. The priest smiles thinly and says perhaps during a public festival. But of course you'll be veiled, and she'll be among the crowd, and neither of you will be allowed to acknowledge the other. That's not the answer you wanted. It's not even really an answer, but it's the only one you'll get. You are not special, not anymore. You're not a daughter or a child, or even quite a person. You are a vessel. You exist to be pure. You exist to serve. You exist to keep the flame alive, not just in the temple, but in Rome itself. If it goes out, the city panics. The Senate blames omens. The people demand justice. And justice, more often than not, comes in the form of burying someone like you alive. But that's not your concern yet. For now, you're just a little girl in a sacred house, wearing a veil that's slightly too large and trying not to shiver on the cold stone floor. Somewhere out there, Rome is burning incense to the gods, erecting statues and celebrating your selection. But here, in this quiet place of marble and shadows, you begin to understand. Sacred doesn't mean safe. It never has. The House of the Vestals is impressive. That's the word people like to use. Impressive. Grand courtyards, sacred fountains, columns taller than your father. Tourists pass by and call it beautiful. Even senators nod with approval when they pass the atrium. But you live here now, and from the inside, it doesn't feel impressive. It feels enormous and cold. The marble under your feet is always cold, even in summer. You sleep in a stone building designed not for comfort, but for control. It echoes too easily. Like everything you say is being recorded by the gods. You share the space with 5 other girls, each of them also property of the divine. Together, you form a little constellation of silence, drifting from ritual to ritual under the watchful eye of priests and statues and whatever higher power they claim is watching. The statues are the worst, blank-faced, smooth-skinned reminders that ideal Roman women are always made of stone. You're not allowed to run, not allowed to laugh. You tried once, just a small giggle during water fetching, and the look the senior Vestal gave you could have frozen lava. You haven't made that mistake again. Your days start early. The temple bells ring before dawn, and that's your signal to get up, bathe in silence, and prepare for the morning offerings. You dress yourself in layers, linen tunics, an underrobe, an overrobe, and of course the veil. The veil is white, always white, and it has to be arranged just so, never crooked or messy. If the gods are watching, the least you can do is look tidy while being slowly erased from history. You don't choose what you wear. You don't choose when to eat, what to learn, or where to stand. You are told. by the senior Vestals, by the priests, by custom. Everything here runs on custom, and custom does not tolerate deviation. The meals are simple and eaten in near silence, broken only by whispered blessings and the occasional warning glance. You aren't starved, but you're not fed richly either. Food is a necessity, not a joy. Joy is not on the schedule. You are trained in the duties of your sacred office, which mostly means you're trained to be invisible. You're taught how to walk soundlessly on marble, how to hold a vessel without letting it clink, how to tend a flame without seeming to breathe too loudly near it. You're taught to keep your eyes respectfully low, but alert. You are taught that sacredness is not something you feel, but something you perform. The priests say you are a chosen vessel. You feel more like a very expensive broom. Sometimes you're allowed to read, religious texts mostly, mythology, prayers, the ancestral laws. One of your instructors once let you see a scroll about the duties of wives and mothers. You read it twice and handed it back without comment. It was hard not to notice what was missing. Nowhere did it mention what to do if you were both wife to the gods and mother to no one. Nowhere did it explain what becomes of a girl, trained only for stillness and spectacle. There's a small garden in the centre of the house of the Vestals, and sometimes, if the schedule permits, and the gods are apparently in a forgiving mood, you're allowed to sit there for a few minutes in the afternoon. It's the only place where the light feels soft instead of sterile. You don't talk. You just sit and listen to the fountains, watch the doves pick at the stones, and try not to remember that this is the only patch of earth you'll be allowed to walk on freely for 30 years. There are visitors sometimes, dignitaries, foreign priests, men in long robes who nod at you with what they think is reverence. You kneel, bless them, recite the lines you've been taught, and keep your expression mild. You are 13 now, and you've learned that reverence often feels a lot like condescension. They call you holy. What they mean is useful. The temple of Vesta is your main domain. That's where the flame is. The eternal flame, they call it. Symbol of Rome's greatness, of its unbroken continuity. You take turns tending it with the others, rotating shifts like some sacred bureaucracy. You sweep the floor, clean the altar, and make sure the flame doesn't flicker. Sometimes you imagine what would happen if it went out. Sometimes you dream about it. Not because you want it to happen, but because you want to know what it would feel like to be the one who did something irreversible. You don't talk about those thoughts, of course. Even thinking them feels like treason. You offer extra prayers just in case the gods are listening. You've been told they always are. You sleep in a cell. It's not a prison cell, but it might as well be. A narrow bed, a wall niche for your sandals, a tiny altar where you leave your nightly offering, a crumb of bread, a pinch of incense, a muttered hope. You lie there at night, still in your robes because changing is too much trouble, and you try to picture the life you might have had. You can't remember your mother's voice anymore. That feels important somehow, like something should be done about it, but nothing will be. Outside the thick temple walls, Rome lives and breathes and argues and bleeds. But inside here, you're part of something colder. Not dead, never that, but embalmed in tradition. Dressed like a bride for gods you never agreed to marry. Given vows you didn't write. Locked in a marble cage polished daily to a high shine, so the people can admire how well behaved you are. And that, in the eyes of Rome, is holiness. Your job, on paper, is very simple. Keep the sacred flame burning. That's it. One task, one symbol, one small fire in a marble temple that isn't supposed to ever go out. You tend it in shifts with the other Vestals. You sweep the hearth, you adjust the logs, you keep the embers hot. Sometimes you pray while you work, though the gods never respond. The work isn't difficult, it's just constant, relentless, and loaded with consequences that are wildly disproportionate to the task itself. This flame is not just a fire, it is Rome. That's what they tell you, and they're serious about it. The flame represents the city's soul, its endurance, its pride, its divine protection. If it dies, so might Rome. That's what the priests say, and no one seems willing to test the theory. So the fire must not die, not for a moment, not even for a second. If it flickers, if it sputters, if it so much as dims during your watch, the weight of centuries falls squarely on your shoulders. It has happened before. They don't tell you the stories outright, but you hear them anyway, in whispers, in cautionary tales, in the way the older Vestals go, suddenly silent when the wind picks up in the wrong direction. A flame once went out long ago. The girl responsible was whipped in public by the Pontifex Maximus himself. It didn't matter that it was raining. It didn't matter that the logs were wet. It didn't matter that she had stayed up all night trying to keep it alive. The fire died, and so did her reputation. She was lucky to keep her life. Others weren't so fortunate. There are rumours, always rumours, of girls who let the flame go out and were buried alive as if they had broken their vow of chastity. Because in Rome, failure is impurity, and impurity spreads. You don't just shame yourself. You shame the state, the gods, the emperor, if he's paying attention. The fire is never allowed to be just fire. It is politics, religion, tradition, and fear, all wrapped in the flickering glow of something that can kill you if it dies. You've never been whipped, not yet. You've never let the flame go out, not yet. But you've come close one night. Your shift dragged on longer than it should have. The wood was poor quality, too damp, not properly seasoned. You stoked the coals harder than usual, praying to gods you didn't believe in, and managed to keep the glow alive by sheer willpower and a few shredded knuckles. You didn't tell anyone how close it came. You just washed the blood off your fingers and stayed quiet. No one congratulates you for keeping the flame alive. That's just your job. No one pats your back or says, "Well done," or offers a kind smile. The flame is expected to burn. You are expected to make it so. And should you ever fail, they'll remind you that it was never your fire to begin with. It was Rome's. You were merely the servant. The failure will be yours alone. You learn tricks, how to arrange the logs in tight pyramids for better airflow, how to spot a dying ember before it fades, how to breathe just enough to coax a flame back to life without blowing it out. You learn how to watch it without blinking too much, and how to endure hours without moving your feet. You learn that sacredness doesn't come from the divine. It comes from repetition, from anxiety, from doing the same thing day after day while praying you don't die because of it. There are no days off, no feast where you're exempt, no shift you can trade. The flame doesn't care if you're tired, if you're sick, if your feet are blistered, or your eyes can barely stay open. The schedule must be followed. The ritual must continue. Rome must burn in this one small symbolic place, even if it burns you out in the process. The temple is quiet at night, quieter than it has any right to be, considering how much fear it contains. You often stand alone, staring into the fire like it's going to tell you something. It never does. It just crackles softly, shifting in its bronze basin, utterly indifferent to your reverence. You've cried in front of it more than once, though never when anyone could see. There's something about the way it moves, always flickering, never resting, that feels familiar. Sometimes you wonder what would happen if you just didn't. If you walked away mid-shift, if you let the fire sputter and smoke until the hearth was cold. Would the gods really strike you down? Would the people revolt? Or would they simply replace you and carry on like nothing happened? The question is dangerous, so you bury it under more wood and keep stoking. You are 16 now. You've been at this for nearly a decade. The fire has never died on your watch, not once. That should be a point of pride, but mostly it just makes you more afraid, because now you have a perfect record. And a perfect record creates only one outcome, a dramatic fall. One mistake, and you become the story the others whisper about. One misstep, and the gods will be hungry. So you keep the flame alive, because Rome says it must be, because your life depends on it, because it's the only warmth you're allowed to touch without suspicion, and because if you fail, there will be no forgiveness, only ceremony. Everything you do is a ritual, not just the ceremonies. Those are obvious with their incense and formal prayers and terribly choreographed solemnity. No, it's the little things too. How you wake, how you breathe, how you fold your veil in the morning, and how you lower your eyes when you pass through a doorway. Every moment of your life is part of the performance, and every movement is rehearsed until you no longer remember how to move any other way. You rise before dawn, not because you're particularly eager to begin the day, but because that's when the bell rings and the schedule begins. You sit up slowly, keeping your posture controlled, your face blank. You fold your sleeping robe with straight edges and minimal sound, because silence is sacred and creased cloth is apparently offensive to the divine. You wash your face with cold water from a brass basin, never splashing, never gasping. Sacred women do not flinch, they certainly don't shiver. You dress yourself with the same care, first the tunic, then the belt, then the outer robe. All of it is regulation white, not a soft white, not a pleasant cream, but a hard, sun-bleached white that stains if you so much as look at a fig. Over that, the veil. It wraps over your hair and down your back, pressed into place with little pins that always manage to jab you when you're in a hurry. The fabric is stiff, and it tightens whenever you move too quickly, like a reminder that grace is not optional. Grace is your job now. You are trained to walk without noise. Heel, toe, shift the weight, glide. It's harder than it sounds, especially on marble floors, in leather sandals. You're trained to carry water from the sacred spring in complete silence, without spilling a drop. It's not a small jar, it's not light, and the path from the spring to the temple isn't exactly flat. But you learn the route, memorize the balance, and hope the gods are watching something else while you wobble down the path in sweat-damp linen. Speaking is a ritual too. You don't speak unless addressed. When you do speak, it must be with calm dignity and appropriate reverence. No slang, no stuttering, no showing teeth unless smiling is explicitly appropriate, and it usually isn't. There are rules for how you greet others, how you accept offerings, how you answer questions from priests, and how you recite prayers. Your voice is never raised, not in joy, not in anger, not even in warning. Vestals do not shout, Vestals do not curse. Vestals, if they are wise, do not express anything, unless it's already been approved by tradition. You begin to lose track of what's you and what's performance. The boundaries blur. At first, you thought of the robes as a costume, uncomfortable but removable. Now, years in, you realise the robe is the only part of you that matters. You aren't seen as a girl or a person or even a name. You are white cloth and silent footsteps. You are a figure, a symbol, a walking emblem of Roman virtue so tightly wound in ceremony that breathing wrong could be interpreted as sacrilege. Even the way you eat is controlled. You eat in the atrium, at a long table with the others, beneath a fresco of Vesta that watches you with benevolent indifference. The meals are plain: bread, cheese, lentils, and always consumed in near total quiet. A senior Vestal begins with a blessing. The rest of you murmur your thanks. No one gulps, no one fidgets, and no one dares spill anything. Not because of etiquette, but because the table is also part of the performance. People sometimes observe you from the doorway. Important people, foreign visitors, senators' wives. You never know who might be watching, and you've learned not to ask. There's a ceremony for everything. Lighting the lamps, entering the temple, beginning your daily instruction. You'd think the gods would get bored of being constantly flattered, but apparently not. You're told that every ritual you perform strengthens the city, that Rome stands because you do, that your discipline holds back chaos, No pressure, obviously. You no longer know what your real posture looks like. Your back is always straight, your arms are always at rest, your hands stay folded unless assigned a task. When you sit, it is with care. When you rise, it is with ceremony. You've learned to sweat without fidgeting, to itch without scratching, to ache without moving. Your muscles are obedient. Your face is still. This is what it means to be sacred in Rome. Complete and utter control at all times, in all things. You still remember how you used to move, as a child, before the veil. You remember running once across your family's courtyard, barefoot and wild, with your hair loose and your voice echoing off the stone. You remember laughing so hard you dropped the amphora you were carrying, and your mother scolding you half-heartedly through a smile. That memory has become a kind of mental contraband, something you only let yourself visit in secret when you're sure no one is looking. It's not sadness exactly, it's distance. You've been hollowed out and filled with rituals, and there's no space left for anything else. You are a symbol now. Symbols don't eat with their fingers. Symbols don't trip on stairs. Symbols don't twitch when flies land on their faces during an outdoor ritual. You are the idea of purity, not the person beneath it. And if there's anything human left inside you, it's not part of the job. You are forbidden from many things: laughter, noise, excess, choice. But above all else, you are forbidden from love. Not just carnal love, though that's certainly on the banned list. No, the rule runs deeper. You are forbidden from glancing too long, from speaking too warmly, from standing too close to any man who isn't wrapped in priestly authority. Flirtation is not mischief here, it's treason. And treason against Rome is not punished with exile or scolding, it is punished with ritualized execution. Your chastity isn't personal. It isn't even spiritual. It's political, religious, strategic. You are technically a public asset. Rome does not own you in name, but in every other sense, you are the city's property. And so your purity is Rome's purity. Your body is an extension of the state. If you were to break your vow, and even if you didn't, but someone whispered that you had, it wouldn't simply be a scandal. It would be considered an omen, a warning, a rot in the bones of the empire. There is no trial. That's one of the most important details, and one they mention early in your training, like a gentle reminder embroidered in gold. If you are accused of breaking your vow, the Pontifex Maximus decides your guilt. He does not require evidence. He does not need a confession. He simply needs to believe it. Or more accurately, to decide that someone must be punished. And you are convenient. There is no appeal, no defense. Sacredness does not shield you. In fact, it makes the fall more theatrical. The punishment is always the same. You are dressed in your sacred white robes. You are led through the forum in silence. People gather, as they always do for public piety, and they pretend not to enjoy the spectacle. You're taken to a chamber, underground, sealed, dark. A small space dug just deep enough to be symbolic. Inside, a couch, a loaf of bread, a lamp, and a single jug of water. Enough to technically keep you alive for a time. Enough to allow the priests to claim that your death was not murder, but neglect. They seal the chamber with a stone slab. The gods are trusted to finish the job. You're told these stories not as threats, but as reminders. Like the way one might leave a warning sign next to a cliff's edge. No one expects you to jump, but the sign is there all the same. You remember the first time you realised how tightly this rule governed you. You were 13, fetching water near the edge of the forum, when a boy your age, noble family, smug haircut, asked your name. You didn't respond, you couldn't. Your voice was not yours to give away. He smiled anyway, made some joke about silent girls being the best kind, and walked on. You thought nothing of it. Until that evening, when the senior Vestal asked if you had encouraged attention while outside the compound. Encouraged. As if your silence had flirted all by itself. From that day forward, you practiced avoiding attention like it was a disease. You kept your eyes down, even when spoken to. You learned to speak with the tone of a disapproving aunt, even to men twice your age. You learned that kindness could be mistaken for warmth, and warmth could be mistaken for interest, and interest could cost you everything. It didn't matter what you felt. It mattered what someone else claimed you felt. Other girls have not been so careful. You remember one, a quiet, pale girl named Livia, who left the house one morning and never came back. The story was vague, but the implications were clear. She'd been seen talking to a guard too often, smiling too much. No one said she was guilty. They didn't have to. She was simply gone. The flame didn't flicker that day, but you could feel the chill anyway. You are allowed to be sacred. You are not allowed to be human. If a senator leers at you during a festival procession, that's considered devotion. If you flinch or look away too fast or seem remotely affected, that's considered disrespect. If a priest touches your hand during a ceremony, it is symbolic. If you twitch or pull back, it's noted. Everything is a performance. You are a statue made of nerves and discipline, sculpted to fit inside a myth you didn't ask to be part of. They say the gods are always watching, but really, it's the men who are, the priests, the public, the politicians. You're a blank canvas onto which they paint their expectations. And if that canvas shifts, even slightly, it must be destroyed. There is something cruelly ironic about being dressed like a bride every day while knowing that you will never marry. Your veil mimics the bridal veil, your robes the bridal tunic, but your marriage is to the flame, to the goddess, to the republic itself. And unlike real brides, there is no dowry, no wedding feast, no chance at happiness. Only the slow grinding maintenance of purity until your usefulness ends. You don't think about love, not because you don't feel it, but because it's dangerous. You've forgotten the shape of desire. You've learned to fear compliments, to shrink from praise, to dread the sound of your name on the lips of strangers. You've trained yourself out of the very instincts that once made you human. Because here, in this sacred house of silent footsteps and ceremonial smiles, one wrong glance could get you buried alive, and all it takes is a whisper. You are, on paper, one of the most powerful women in Rome. People say this with reverence, as if it's meant to reassure you. As a Vestal virgin, your presence is considered sacred, your touch legally potent. You can grant clemency to a condemned man simply by brushing his shoulder. You can validate a will, void a marriage, or prevent an execution with a single word. The crowds part when you walk through the forum. Senators bow their heads. Even the emperor is expected to show you respect. But there's something hollow about that power. Something too polished, too performative. The kind of power that is held only as long as you never try to use it in a way that actually matters. You're not feared for what you might do. You're feared for what might happen if you falter. If a Vestal stumbles, Rome shudders. If a Vestal falls, the people demand omens and answers. You are not a person wielding power. You are a symbol holding a mirror up to the state. And that mirror must never crack. You learn quickly that your influence is ceremonial. Yes, you can technically free a slave, but only if someone else places that slave in your path and publicly asks you to intervene. Yes, you can stop an execution, but only if you arrive before the blade falls, and only if the condemned man can reach you. It's like being given a sword made of gold, impressive to look at, but useless in battle. Your authority is stage managed, your decisions rehearsed in advance, your miracles conveniently timed. The men in power love to gesture toward your status when they want to prove how enlightened the Republic is. Look, they say, even the sacred flame is tended by women. Even the gods trust them. But when it comes to real decisions, real governance, real danger, you're kept safely out of reach. Revered, yes. Consulted occasionally. Obeyed only when it's convenient. The priests use you to sanctify their rituals. The senators use you to legitimize their policies. The public uses you to feel morally upright. You, in turn, are allowed to exist so long as you remain immaculate. It is a transaction dressed up as divinity. You perform your duties flawlessly, and in return, they pretend you are more than a prisoner in embroidered linen. You've sat in the imperial box during games. You've been given seats of honor at state festivals. You've been offered gifts, fruit, cloth, statues carved in your likeness. But none of it belongs to you. It belongs to your office. If you were dismissed, disgraced, or even quietly retired, the honor would vanish with you. They'd smile at your replacement just as easily. They wouldn't remember your name in a year. You're not allowed to express opinions, but everyone seems convinced you have them. They project dignity onto your silence, wisdom onto your composure. They act as though your every glance is a cryptic statement, a sacred insight. You could cough during a procession, and half the city would interpret it as an omen. You learn to cough carefully. Once, a senator asked your opinion on a matter of law, not in public, of course, just a private conversation after a festival, the kind of casual inquiry that carries weight. You answered him with the official phrase you'd been trained to use, polite and non-committal. He smiled, nodded, and walked away. 3 days later, you heard he'd used your answer as evidence in a debate, citing you as the moral compass of Rome. You hadn't said anything of substance. That apparently was part of the charm. There is danger in being idealized. When people think you're perfect, they stop forgiving you for being human. And in your case, they stop acknowledging that you were ever human in the first place. You are not allowed to stumble, to age, to falter. You must not look tired or annoyed. You must not cry. You must not change. The moment you slip, they will call it corruption. The moment you fail, they will say the gods are angry. Even the other Vestals feel it. You all live under the same rules, but the hierarchy still creeps in. The ones with better lineage are watched more closely. The ones who smile less are treated as more devout. You've seen one girl praised for her solemnity and another condemned for her coldness, even though they acted exactly the same. Sacred doesn't mean fair, sacred means fragile, and fragile things are blamed when they break. You stand at the intersection of faith and politics, and you're crushed by both. The priests use you to placate the gods. The politicians use you to placate the people. If something goes wrong in Rome, a drought, a rebellion, a bad harvest, the Vestals are the first suspects. Not because you caused it, but because someone has to answer for it. You are not feared, you are watched. You have influence but no autonomy. Visibility but no voice. Reverence but no refuge. You are paraded through streets lined with marble and ash, given flowers and applause, and then escorted back to your temple to live under the same crushing weight of perfection. You are both ornament and scapegoat. They don't fear you. They fear what your failure would mean. That's the unspoken truth behind every bowed head, every exaggerated display of respect. You represent the gods, and if you fall, Rome might have to admit that even the gods can't keep everything together. There are 5 other Vestals. You live together in the house of the Vestals, sharing meals, chambers, duties and silence. From the outside, it probably looks like sisterhood, a holy sorority bound by divine purpose, equal in status joined by fate. But you know better. There is no equality in constant surveillance. And there is no true sisterhood when every gesture could be mistaken for guilt. You are not enemies, you are not friends, you are something stranger, an uneasy chain of compliance. You train together, walk together, pray together. You recite the same words and perform the same rituals with synchronized grace. But underneath that unity is a quiet competition. Not for favor, not for power, but for safety. Because the truth is, if one of you fails, the others suffer. If one of you stumbles, the rest are inspected more closely. If one of you sins, the whole house is shamed. You're expected to report each other. This isn't framed as betrayal. It's framed as duty. If a fellow Vestal violates the vow, even in appearance, you're obligated to speak. To remain silent is to become complicit. That too is punishable. So you watch, you listen, you notice who lingers too long in the temple courtyard, who whispers during the water collection, who seems distracted during prayers. And if something seems wrong, you say so. You don't do this out of malice. You do it because it's the only protection you have. If the Pontifex suspects impurity, he will ask questions. And if you cannot answer them, he will assume the worst. You've seen it happen. A girl was accused once, nothing confirmed, just a rumour. And when her closest companion hesitated before defending her, they both disappeared within a week. One condemned, the other quietly reassigned, likely to a life of silence, far from Rome. You don't ask where they went. The house itself seems designed to encourage this tension. The architecture is open. The corridors echo. There are no doors, only thresholds. No secrets, only things whispered carefully behind woven curtains. Even when you are alone, you are not alone. Guards patrol the perimeter, priests drift through unannounced, and servants pass through with ceremonial excuses just often enough to remind you that privacy is not part of your sacred contract. You become your own warden. You review your words before you speak. You review your posture before you stand. You review your expressions before you allow them to reach your face. You say the right things, even when no one is listening, because someone might be. You arrange your veil precisely, not because you fear divine retribution, but because the senior Vestal has a way of noticing even the smallest creases. Some of the older girls take pride in this vigilance. They believe it's a virtue. Discipline, they say, is a kind of love. Structure is a kind of freedom. You don't argue. You nod and listen and agree when expected. But in your quieter moments, you wonder if they really believe it, or if they've simply been repeating the phrase for so long, they've forgotten how to question it. There are moments of softness, rare, unspoken ones, a shared glance when a priest mispronounces a prayer, a hand brushing yours beneath the altar when the oil burns too hot, a muffled laugh when someone sneezes during a purification rite. These are not friendships exactly, but they are reminders that you are still alive beneath the veil, that the other girls are too, but such moments vanish quickly, swallowed by the rules. The youngest of you is 11. She cries at night sometimes, though she tries not to. The older girls pretend not to hear her. You leave her an extra blanket once and pretend you didn't. She never mentions it, but her nod the next morning is enough. You don't speak about it because kindness is not part of your official duties, and too much affection could be mistaken for secret keeping. The truth is, you trust no one entirely, not because they are untrustworthy, but because you've been taught that trust is dangerous. You don't confide, you don't confess. If something frightens you, you pray about it silently. If you make a mistake, you correct it quickly and without witness. You assume the same of the others. It's the only way to stay safe. Every now and then, someone tries to challenge this unspoken order. A new girl, usually, someone young and idealistic, still clinging to the notion that shared suffering breeds solidarity. She'll try to organise small moments of connection, braiding each other's hair, exchanging quiet jokes, suggesting a group song during morning chores. It never lasts. The senior Vestal notices. The mood shifts. A warning is issued, nothing harsh, just a reminder about decorum. The girl learns, or she doesn't, and she becomes a cautionary tale. The priests like to call the Vestals a family. They say you are daughters of Rome, bound by a higher calling. It's a convenient fiction. Families forgive. Families offer comfort. Families hold you when you're scared. This place offers none of that. It offers purpose, yes. Clarity, yes. But not love, not comfort, only vigilance. You have memorized the art of staying neutral. Not too cold, not too warm. not too distant, not too familiar. You greet each Vestal with the same tone, the same nod, the same carefully measured level of respect. Anything more is favouritism. Anything less is disrespect. In the house of the Vestals, balance isn't just important. It's survival. You do not hate the other girls. You do not love them either. You simply exist beside them, moving through a shared labyrinth of expectation. And in the end, perhaps that is sisterhood in Rome. Not affection, not protection, but co-surveillance in sacred silence. You are not hidden from Rome. You are presented, displayed, elevated even, but not as yourself, only as the role you've been moulded into. You appear at festivals, triumphs, executions, and state rituals. You are positioned just so, given lines that are older than most of the buildings around you, and expected to deliver them in perfect cadence. You are a symbol, and symbols are only useful when they are legible, predictable, immaculate. They like to say that your presence sanctifies the occasion, that having a Vestal nearby purifies the air, calms the gods, reassures the people. Really, your job is to signal that everything is under control, that Rome is still Rome, that the fires burn, the gods are pleased, and no one need ask uncomfortable questions. You're like a divine stamp of approval, only with better posture and significantly more embroidery. You've stood beside generals returning from war, watching as prisoners shuffle past in chains while the crowds cheer. You've watched condemned criminals march to execution, your presence supposedly offering spiritual balance to the violence. You've appeared at the crowning of priests, the inauguration of bridges, the blessing of new roads. Sometimes you don't even know what you're blessing until after the fact. It doesn't matter. The ritual is the same. The city is fed its performance. You are never the centre of attention, but you are always in the frame. The people don't come to see you, not exactly, but they'd notice if you weren't there. Your absence would make them nervous. Your presence is a kind of reassurance. Even the most brutal spectacle is easier to digest when a Vestal stands nearby, serene and composed, implying that the gods are watching and apparently unbothered. No one asks what you think. No one even pretends to care. The idea that you might have thoughts, real, unfiltered, unsanctioned thoughts, would be deeply unsettling to the system. Your value lies in your silence, in the assumption that your beliefs align perfectly with your role. You don't even ask yourself what you think anymore. There's no space for it. The rituals come too quickly, too often, and always on schedule. Introspection is not on the calendar. Before each event, you're prepared like a ceremonial object. Your robes are inspected. Your veil is adjusted. Your hands are perfumed. Not because you smell, but because you must appear untouchable. You are transported with quiet dignity, flanked by guards and priests who speak only in formal tones. You do not ride in a litter. You glide. That's what they call it. Gliding. In reality, it's walking in a very straight line, while hoping you don't trip in front of a crowd of onlookers with knives and scrolls. Sometimes the crowds chant your name, not your real name. No one remembers that. They chant Vesta, or Vestal, or Sacra. You smile faintly when appropriate. You nod slowly. You keep your eyes unfocused, just enough to seem serene but not vacant. It's a look you've practiced for years. You could teach a course on it, if teaching weren't considered beneath your station. You've been painted, sculpted, etched into commemorative tablets. Your face, or at least the idea of your face, has been frozen in time by artists who were told to capture holiness. You've seen these images and they don't look like you. They don't look like any living person. They look like an ideal, pale, placid, untouchable. If you pointed out the difference, no one would understand why it matters. The symbol is always more valuable than the source material. When dignitaries visit from distant provinces, you are introduced as part of the Roman miracle. Behold the sacred virgins, proof that Rome is blessed disciplined, eternal. You recite the blessings you've memorized, bow at the right moment, and accept their awkward compliments with silent grace. Some of them look at you like you're a ghost, others like you're a prize. You've learned to see the difference. There are ceremonies that last hours, where you must stand still in the sun while priests chant to indifferent gods and magistrates read decrees no one will remember. You cannot shift your weight. You cannot wipe the sweat from your temple. You cannot sigh. One year, a younger Vestal fainted during a particularly long solstice rite. The priests carried her away with great concern. She was not punished, but she was not chosen for public ritual again. The lesson was received by everyone else. You are exhausted by the end of each ceremony, not from movement, there's very little of that, but from the tension. Holding the pose, holding the role, holding yourself in one piece while everyone around you projects divinity onto your carefully trained stillness. You return to the house of the Vestals, sore in places that shouldn't ache from standing. You lie down and feel your limbs tremble, not from weakness but from restraint. And yet, the rituals continue. Rome thrives on them, on the idea that its power is not just military or political, but sacred, eternal. You are the proof they point to, a living thread of divine continuity. You've learned that the most dangerous kind of power is the kind that comes dressed as reverence. People will revere you right into the ground. You are the embodiment of sacred silence, of composure, of grace. You are what the empire wishes Roman women would be: obedient, beautiful, dignified, and above all else, quiet. Rome doesn't need you to lead. It needs you to be seen, standing, gliding, smiling faintly at the bloodied altars of state. Because in Rome, the most useful woman is one who performs perfection without ever being heard. It almost happens one year, not during a great crisis, not during some dramatic upheaval, just a normal day made treacherous by chance and exhaustion. A storm rolls in from the north, sudden and violent, the kind that slams shutters open and hurls prayers back into the temple walls. The air turns heavy. The sky darkens too quickly. You're on duty. Your shift was meant to end 2 hours earlier, but the rota was disrupted. Another Vestal fell ill, and the replacement never arrived. You didn't complain. You didn't have time to. You keep feeding the flame as the wind rattles the marble colonnade and the rain drums on the temple roof. You adjust the logs like you've done 1,000 times before. You whisper the standard incantation under your breath. You kneel to check the embers, shielding the basin from the draft with your body. It's mechanical by now, this ritual. You know it better than you know your own name. But this time, the fire doesn't catch. It hisses, it sputters. It pulls back like it's thinking about dying. You pause for just a second, confused, before instinct takes over. You adjust the kindling, try again, whisper another invocation. Not because you believe the gods will intervene, but because habit makes you feel like they might. Nothing. Just smoke, and a sickening silence where the crackle should be. You don't panic. Not yet. You move faster, but with care, pretending you're still composed, still sacred, still not seconds away from historical catastrophe. You don't call for help. That would be admitting something is wrong, and admitting something is wrong would invite witnesses. So you keep working. You grab fresh wood from the sacred pile. You shift the ashes to expose the warmest coals. You fan the embers slowly with your sleeve, not daring to breathe too hard, afraid even your breath might snuff it out entirely. And finally, it flickers. A tiny flame, weak, unstable, but flame nonetheless. You feed it cautiously, like a child coaxing a wild animal closer. A little oil, a little breath, more kindling. You hum one of the hymns, quiet, tuneless, the kind sung only when your voice is too thin to speak. And by some miracle, or luck, or simple chance, the fire returns. It sputters once more, coughs out a single puff of grey smoke, and then catches. Real, solid, alive. You do not celebrate. You do not relax. You stay perfectly still for a long time, heart pounding in your throat, eyes locked on the flame like it might betray you again. You don't know how long you kneel there, motionless, but when a priest finally steps into the chamber, you're already standing again. You smile faintly, you nod. You perform normality with the precision of a surgeon. No one notices. At least, no one says anything if they do. Perhaps they saw the smoke but dismissed it. Perhaps they chose to pretend. Or perhaps you were lucky for once. All that matters is that the flame lives, and so do you. But afterward, something in you changes. You wake from dreams where the fire dies and you're dragged into the forum barefoot and blindfolded. You feel heat in your throat when you speak, like smoke never really left it. You begin to fear the silence more than the ritual, because in that silence, you hear yourself, your thoughts, your doubts, the sickening thrum of vulnerability that has no place in a sacred house. You start to notice just how fragile the whole performance is, how one missed assignment, one cracked log, one gust of wind can turn centuries of tradition into a death sentence. The fire is not divine. It's not even particularly well built. It is ordinary. Ordinary and volatile, just like you. You check it more often now, even when it's not your shift. You find excuses to pass through the temple, to glance sideways at the hearth, to feel the warmth just long enough to confirm it still lives. You become superstitious about it, counting your steps, repeating blessings under your breath, never turning your back until the flame is fully fed. You don't tell anyone. You don't need to. They'd call it devotion. You know it's fear. The rota was adjusted after that week. No one mentioned your extended shift. No one asked why you looked pale for 3 days. The other girls noticed, of course, but they also understood. In this house, trauma is not discussed. It is refined into deeper ritual, more precision, more silence. You aren't allowed to admit that you nearly died. Not because the flame would have killed you, but because Rome would have. You think about what would have happened if it had gone out. The ceremony, the punishment, the stone chamber, the loaf of bread, and the oil lamp, the applause as the slab was sealed. You can picture it too clearly. You've seen it rehearsed before, in the stories, in the warnings, in the eyes of the senior Vestal, who once told you that accidents do not exist in sacred spaces. And now, when you kneel beside the flame, you don't feel reverent. You feel watched, not by gods, but by the weight of expectation. The unbearable pressure to be perfect, to be a symbol, to hold your breath while the wind howls through the columns and the empire rests on a spark no larger than a candle's whisper. You survived, this time, but you know the margin is razor thin, and the next girl who fails may not be as lucky, or maybe the next time it will be you again. And no matter how tightly you grip the rituals, no matter how carefully you kneel, there will be a day when the wind blows just wrong, and the fire, indifferent and eternal, won't come back. You've heard the stories, everyone has. They're passed around like smuggled prayers, quiet, incomplete, and always with an edge of warning. Not told outright, of course, not during instruction, and certainly not by the priests, but whispered at night, or shared in half-finished thoughts as someone folds her veil a little too tightly. Stories that aren't part of the official rites, but are carved just as deeply into the foundations of the House of the Vestals. There's Tuccia, the one they always mention first. She was accused of what no one really says anymore. Impurity, naturally. It's always impurity, but she proved her innocence, supposedly, by carrying water in a sieve from the Tiber to the temple. The gods kept it from spilling. A miracle, they say. A sign that she was sacred, not spoiled. You've tried to picture it. The way she must have walked, slow and terrified, not knowing whether the gods would cooperate. You wonder what would have happened if the water had fallen through. No one tells that part. Then there's Cornelia. That story is quieter. more tragic. She was found guilty, not by evidence but by suspicion. They say she looked too happy one spring, that she lingered near a visiting magistrate too long, that someone saw them speaking during a festival. Whatever it was, it didn't matter. She was buried alive beneath the city, in a sealed chamber, like the one you've dreamed about more than once. Her name was never fully cleared, just another shadow behind a ceremony. Aulus was the man she was accused of loving. No one talks about him much. That's how you know it mattered. He vanished shortly after Cornelia's sentence. Some say he fled Rome, others say he was executed quietly. A few claim he joined a distant legion and died in some forgettable skirmish, bleeding for a city that had already erased him. You've never seen his name in the temple records. That too feels deliberate. You're never told these stories directly. You gather them over years, scraps of overheard conversation, sharp glances exchanged between older girls, strange silences in the middle of lessons. They're warnings wrapped in myth, presented just vaguely enough to avoid consequence, but clear enough to chill your blood. The message is always the same. The gods are watching, and the city is worse. Sometimes you wonder how many of the stories are even real. Maybe Tuccia's sieve never held water. Maybe Cornelia was never guilty. Maybe the whole narrative was written afterward to justify a punishment that had already been decided. Rome has a talent for rewriting shame into sacrifice, especially when the dead can't object. You try not to think about what story they'll tell about you. Not now, not yet. But you know it's coming. Whether you die young or live to be released at 40, your life will be flattened into a tale, a model of virtue or a cautionary failure. You won't be asked how you felt, or what you feared, or whether you ever dreamed of walking barefoot outside the city walls. They'll call you holy if you're lucky. They'll call you tragic if you're not. You've read enough inscriptions to know how this works. The marble plaques with their carefully carved phrases. She kept the flame. She served the goddess faithfully. She was chaste and beloved. None of them mention the cold flaws, the endless fear, the pressure to never blink the wrong way. The history of your life will be written by people who never once had to live it. Every so often someone asks if you want to be remembered, if you hope to be immortalized in temple murals or listed among the great Vestals of old. You smile, nod politely, and give the answer they want to hear. Of course, who wouldn't want to be remembered? But deep down, you're not sure. Being remembered by Rome often means being misremembered. Your silence mistaken for serenity. Your obedience rewritten as joy. The younger girls ask questions sometimes. Not the ones they're supposed to ask, but the dangerous ones. What if she was innocent? What if the gods weren't watching? What if the punishment was for something else? You never answer directly. You've learned how to respond with a change of subject, a soft rebuke, a mention of duty, but the questions linger. You carry them with you, like invisible offerings, small unspoken truths that don't belong in the temple, but refuse to leave. There are moments when the veil slips, metaphorically at least, late at night, between ceremonies, when the older Vestals sit in the garden, backs straight, faces composed, and someone says a name with a tone that isn't quite reverent, a moment of shared memory that doesn't align with the official version. You cling to those moments. They remind you that beneath the ritual, there are women here, women who remember, women who know, but you also know the limits. You can whisper, you can wonder, but you cannot act. To question too openly is to invite attention, and attention, in your position, is lethal. So you stay quiet. You let the stories hover in the margins of your mind, just out of reach. You tell yourself they're just history, that they happened long ago, that Rome has changed. And yet, every time you hear a rustle in the hall at night, every time a priest lingers too long after a ceremony, every time the pontifex glances at your road during a festival, the old stories come back. not as myths, but as warnings. Because you know the truth now, even if no one says it aloud. The veil is thin, the role is fragile, the line between veneration and condemnation is razor sharp. And no matter how careful you are, someone will always be writing your story for you. 30 years later, you're released. Technically, there is no ceremony, no great parade, no final blessing, just a quiet acknowledgement from the priests that your service is complete, your vow fulfilled. They nod with practiced gravity and tell you that you may now leave the house of the Vestals, as if walking out the front gate will somehow return you to the world you left behind. Before your voice had even settled into adulthood, you step outside with the same composure you've always worn, because sacredness doesn't evaporate just because the job is finished. Your veil is lighter now. Your hands tremble slightly, but you hold them steady. The marble threshold beneath your feet is familiar, but beyond it, everything feels impossibly distant. Rome is louder than you remember, dirtier. It always was, of course, but the silence of the house had softened it. Now, every market cry and sandal scuff sounds like thunder. You have no home to return to. Your family's gone, buried, exiled, or simply erased by time. 30 years is a long silence. Brothers become strangers. Parents become names etched on tombs. No one writes to a Vestal, no one visits. The purity of your station demanded isolation, and now that purity has turned to dust in your hands. You are free, they say. But freedom, like fire, is only comforting if you know how to hold it. You have no dowry. That would have required preparation, planning, parents who saw your future as something other than an altar. You have no money, no estate, no children, and no bloodline to continue. You are legally permitted to marry now. That's the generous offer the state makes to women like you. One brief nod toward reintegration, as if 3 decades of divine servitude can be softened by a ring and a husband. But who would want you? You are not young. You are not trained in the domestic arts. You cannot sing, you cannot flirt, and you do not know how to make yourself small for the comfort of a man who has never bowed before a priest. You are not romantic, you are not charming, you are the embodiment of a myth that Rome no longer needs to uphold. The kind of woman people nod to politely in the street, but do not invite to dinner. You try to smile when people greet you. It comes out strange. Your face remembers the motion, but your body has forgotten how to mean it. You bow slightly, too slowly. You speak a little too formally. Everything you do feels ceremonial, even in private. The habits drilled into your bones will not die just because someone said the vow is over. You spent your entire life being watched. It takes time to learn how to move when no one is recording your mistakes. You consider returning to the temple, not as a priestess, but as a visitor. Maybe you'll feel something there, some connection. But when you approach the outer steps, you're met with confused looks. The younger Vestals don't recognize you. The priests don't remember your name. You realize, with an ache deeper than shame, that you no longer belong there either. So you wander. You try to learn the rhythms of the city again. You visit the forum, though no one parts for you now. You shop in the markets, fumbling with coins you barely understand. You ask for directions and receive them with impatience or pity. You sleep in a borrowed room, the floor unfamiliar, and somehow colder than marble. The world outside the temple is not cruel exactly, just indifferent, and you're not equipped for indifference. You begin to vanish in small ways, first from the memory of the priests, then from the lips of the public. The people who once bowed in your presence now barely glance your way. You are not sacred anymore. You are not feared. You are not useful. You are something awkward, something Rome prefers not to examine too closely. A living relic who kept her vow and came back to find that no one was waiting. You try to pray, but the words feel dry in your mouth. You try to cook, but your hands aren't used to preparing food, only offering it. You try to speak plainly, but decades of filtered speech get in the way. You realize slowly and without ceremony that you have no identity outside the flame. You were made for a purpose. That purpose has ended. What remains is debris. Other retired Vestals exist somewhere. You've heard of them. They live in modest houses, supported by small pensions, occasionally sought for advice no one intends to follow. You think of finding them, but what would you say? Do they feel this hollow too? Or have they managed to become people again? You lie awake at night and try to remember your name before you entered the temple. It takes longer than you expect. When it finally returns, it sounds strange in your mind, foreign, childish, like it belonged to someone else entirely. And perhaps it did. That girl disappeared the moment the veil touched her head. This woman who remains is a statue slowly learning how to move again. You walk through Rome like a rumour that never quite caught on. The Forum is still there, marble, sun-bleached, thrumming with politics and trade, but no one looks up when you pass. You're no longer part of its design. Your presence doesn't mean anything anymore, not even enough to register as background. The statues haven't changed. They still tower over the city like memory preserved in stone, eyes fixed on eternity. You used to imagine yourself among them, if not carved, then at least remembered. Now, even that fantasy feels indulgent. They don't carve statues of women who simply endured. Sometimes you pass by the temple, not to visit. You're not welcome there. You're a former Vestal now, useful once, but no longer part of the performance. You watch the newer girls walk in procession, robes stiff, eyes lowered. You remember what it was like to move like that, to hold your breath in case someone mistook it for irreverence. You wonder if they feel the same quiet panic beneath the surface, or if they still believe it's holy. What stings most isn't being excluded. It's how easy it was, as if the 30 years you gave the city were nothing but wax melted away the moment the flame passed to other hands. The few priests who still recognize you nod with vague politeness, grateful perhaps that you didn't become a scandal. That's the highest praise a retired Vestal can earn. You didn't disgrace the marble. You once believed that being sacred would make you unforgettable, but Rome doesn't remember people. It remembers myths, and myths can be replaced. You've tried to build new routines. You wake early, not because you must, but because your body still expects the bell. You fold your shawl with the same reverence you once gave your ceremonial veil. You whisper old chants without meaning to, not because you believe they matter, but because silence feels wrong without them. It's not grief, not exactly. You don't want to go back, but there was clarity in that life, however cruel. Every action had a reason, every breath a ritual. Now you buy figs and bread and wonder if you're spending your coin too quickly. You were taught how to carry water without spilling a drop, but not how to argue with vendors. You were trained to bless armies, but not to rent a room. And yet you adapt, slowly, reluctantly. You learn to speak in contractions. You learn how to curse, though it still feels like blasphemy in your mouth. You learn to laugh, quietly at first, then louder. It shocks you every time, that your voice can sound like that, unmeasured, unguarded, alive. You watch the new Vestals during festivals. One of them reminds you of yourself, not in the shape of her face, but in the way she folds her hands when nervous, fingers twitching beneath the sleeves. You wonder what her story will be, what rumours will cling to her when she's gone, what lesson she'll be twisted into. You know how they'll talk about you. You've already overheard pieces of it. A quiet one. Never faltered. A model of restraint. You want to laugh. You want to interrupt and say, "No, I was terrified. I was numb. I was a girl trying not to die under marble." But no one would believe you. The past is only sacred once it's been cleaned up for public use. Sometimes you dream that you're back in the house, not as a Vestal, but as a statue in the atrium garden. Cold, still, watched. The girls walk past you without seeing. You're both witness and warning. You wake from those dreams aching in your joints, breath shallow, heart pounding, like you've just been sentenced again. You miss the marble, not because it was kind, but because it was consistent. Because there was comfort in knowing where to stand, what to wear, when to speak. You didn't have a life, but you had rules. Now, in their absence, everything feels weightless. Choices, freedom, possibility, they all hang around you like questions you don't know how to answer. The city moves on. The rituals continue. The flame still burns. You tell yourself this is good, that Rome stands because you did, that your sacrifice had meaning. But late at night, alone in your room, you wonder if the fire would have burned just as brightly without you. You walk through the streets, sacred no longer, remembered only in the places where memory is a matter of convenience, not feared, not revered, not condemned, just irrelevant. A relic with lungs, moving through a city that has already replaced you with newer girls and cleaner stories. You do not speak of your past unless asked. Even then, you offer the version that feels least confusing, the version they expect. They nod, they smile, they say you were lucky, and maybe you were, but some nights you miss the silence. Not because it was peaceful, but because at least then you knew who you were supposed to be. You were chosen, but not for who you were, not for your thoughts, your dreams, your cleverness or your kindness, not even for your obedience, not really. You were chosen for your body's eligibility, your lineage, the unbroken status of your parents, the smoothness of your skin, the symmetry of your limbs. You were a candidate because you fit a shape Rome had already drawn, and once selected, you were pressed into it until all the parts that didn't conform were shaved away. You were sacred, but never safe. That's the paradox no one ever explains at the start. The holier you were declared, the closer you stood to danger. One misstep, one rumour, one ill-timed gust of wind could pull the entire system down on your head. Sacredness wasn't a shield. It was a pressure cooker, a spotlight you could never step out of, even when you trembled under its heat. There was no room for fear, no allowance for doubt, and certainly no protection if someone decided you had failed. You were free to serve, but never to leave. Rome loves that kind of freedom, the kind that comes with fine print. You were called exalted, but your hours were scheduled to the minute. You were told, you were honoured, but your words were filtered through the mouths of priests. You were permitted to bless crowds, but not to touch a man's hand. You were fed, clothed, and praised, but never trusted with your own fate. The doors of the temple were open to let others see you, not for you to walk away. Your body was never yours, not once, not at 6 years old, when the Pontifex Maximus laid his hand on your shoulder and said the gods had claimed you, not at 13, when your voice was still cracking and they taught you how to speak without inflection, not at 20, when you spent every waking moment trying not to make the wrong gesture, and not at 40, when they finally said your service was complete and you stepped out into a world that no longer knew what to do with you. At every stage, your body was a vessel, for the goddess, for the flame, for the idea of Rome itself. You belonged to others, to the city, to the gods, to the crowds that cheered your silence and purity without ever wondering what you thought. You learned not to think too deeply, because thought was a crack in the marble. You learned not to feel too much because emotion was dangerous in someone so publicly owned. You gave yourself over, piece by piece, until nothing truly private remained. Even your prayers were public performance, and now that it's over, you aren't sure who's left. You have a name, but it doesn't feel like it fits anymore. It's the one you were born with, the one your mother whispered on the day they took you, but it hasn't been spoken in decades. You're used to titles now. Vestal, virgin, priestess, sacred one. You've been addressed with deference and distance for so long that your name sounds wrong in your own mouth. You say it sometimes, quietly, to see if it still means anything. It doesn't. You have a body, but it feels borrowed. Everything you wore was chosen for you. Everything you touched was symbolic. Every motion you made was for the eyes of others. Now, when you move through a crowd, no one watches. That should be a relief. It isn't. The freedom is weightless and unfamiliar, and you find yourself standing too still, walking too softly, waiting for correction that never comes. You don't know how to take up space without permission. You have thoughts again, but they frighten you. They arrive unbidden, unwelcome, years of repression, unraveling themselves in strange ways. You dream of fire and silence. You remember faces you haven't seen in decades. You feel things, grief, resentment, desire, but the feelings have nowhere to go. You were never taught what to do with emotions that weren't devotion or fear. You try to write them down, but the words feel too loud, like they might echo through the walls and call down judgment. And yet, there is something underneath all of it, a faint pulse, a murmur of possibility. It's not hope, not yet, but it is curiosity, a flicker of self, untouched by ceremony, a part of you that existed before the veil and survived behind it. You catch glimpses of her in the mirror sometimes, in the line of your jaw, in the way your eyes narrow when someone lies to you. She's smaller than you expected, but she's still there. You wonder what kind of person you might have been, if your life had been your own, if you'd married, had children, fought in arguments where your voice wasn't sacred but simply yours. You wonder if you would have laughed louder, or cried harder, or danced without thinking of form. But these are the wrong questions. Not because they're painful, but because they assume there was ever a choice. There wasn't. Not really. You kept the flame alive. You wore the veil. You said the prayers. You were what they needed you to be. And Rome endured. That was the deal. What you didn't know, what no one tells you when they place the torch in your hands, is that you are the fuel as well as the keeper. The flame burns because you do. They will say you were noble, dutiful, pure, and maybe you were. But beneath the ash, beneath the silence and stillness and smoke, you were something else too. You were a girl, and no one warned her what it would cost. That brings us to the end of tonight's story. If you're still awake, thank you for walking the marble corridors with me, for standing too still beside the flame, and for remembering a life Rome tried very hard to forget. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet, exhausted histories, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, you'll find a link to the Patreon in the description. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with other parts of history you'd like to see covered. And if you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps others find their way to these stories. Sleep well.